Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Audrey Crane, and I am re-recording a session that we did back in August because we had a lot of discussion and great questions and conversation, but it made for a difficult edit for a Heavybit. So we decided to re-record it. So it's slightly weird sitting alone in my office / bedroom recording this to nobody, but I hope that you'll find the content interesting, and we're certainly excited to share it with Heavybit. So we'll get into it. So my name is Audrey Crane, and I'm one of 4 partners actually at a company called DesignMap. And what we do at DesignMap is we do user experience strategy and design, mostly focused on the B2B enterprise space. We do some B2C work as well in healthcare, finance, but we're pretty focused on design for complex spaces. So often that is B2B. So we've been around for 14 years now, and I have been working in Silicon Valley for companies like Netscape back in the olden days, Kelly Blue Book, and several design consultancies, as well as internal running my own design teams. So that's where I come from. So a few years ago, the CEO of a small company, this is him, called me and he said, look, I'm running this company now. It's about 200 people, and I understand engineering. I'm an engineer myself, so I understand the technology part. I've learned about HR and finance and operations, but I don't know about design. I think it's important to the success of our company, but I don't know about it, and I don't know what I should know or how I should know about it. And I thought that was a brilliant question. I wish more CEOs had called to ask us this question. I'm not sure why they haven't, but I wasn't really sure what to say to him. Obviously, he doesn't want to learn Photoshop or Sketch or Figma. I could give him a copy of the Design of Everyday Things, but that's not exactly it really either. So I was really curious about this question, and I started calling around. I called around to several business leaders who are great advocates for design that I knew through my work at DesignMap and other places, to ask them how they became advocates for design, how they learned about design, and learned to leverage it in their companies to make their companies more successful. And what I saw was that 80% of, or maybe even 90% of what they said, they kind of had a common understanding of design that matched mine. But there were these 10% gaps that didn't match. They didn't overlap with one another, where there were just these spaces that they had a really different idea than how we normally do things, or just a hole in their understanding. And so from those conversations was born this book, What CEOs Need to Know About Design. So it was kind of silly to try to write it's a short book, not very long. It's like less than an hour read about such a broad topic. It overgeneralizes and leaves some things out. But what we've heard from people who read it is that it does provide a useful baseline for understanding. And so this talk, obviously, when I originally gave it and had the conversation with the other Heavybit founders, we had less than an hour. So obviously I'm not going to cover everything that anyone needs to know about design in less than an hour. In fact, the talk itself was about 30 minutes. So, but I'm going to cover some very common gaps and mistakes that we see in business leaders, product managers, and CEOs and entrepreneurs, and hopefully you'll find them helpful. I would expect that you'll also hear some stuff I hope you do. Otherwise, this would be way off, but I hope there's that 10% for you as well that's really helpful. I am Aud Crane, by the way, on Twitter and LinkedIn, or Audrey at DesignMap.com if you want to email me with any feedback or questions. So throughout the talk, I've kind of structured it as like bringing in designers, working with designers, and giving feedback to designers. But throughout the talk, I'll have these red slides that kind of call out those opportunities of things that we see commonly trip people up. So to start, I have this section on investing in design. Now, I took out a bunch of slides that were the details. Sorry, there's my puppy in the background. Details from reports, from various reports. And I'm assuming that as founders, you guys are, men and women, are familiar with many of these reports, but I just wanted to capture here a few of them that really stood out to me and kind of their punchlines. So Forrester worked with IBM to try to assess the total economic impact of their investment. It was a 3-year major investment in design. They call it design thinking, but I would broaden that it did apply to design writ large. And the punchline was this 301% ROI. There's a report from McKinsey called The Business Value of Design, and I just called out here again the high points. Envision has some great reports that come out frequently on this stuff. And there's an older one called the Design Value Index from the Design Management Institute, but it looks at companies that are publicly traded that they rate. And many of these reports have these kinds of indices where they say, okay, to be a design-centric company, you have to meet 5 out of these 7 criteria. So you can kind of rank yourself. So Envision does that. This Design Management Institute report does that. So they identified publicly traded companies that scored high on their index and then looked at how they performed on the S&P 500. This is a couple of years old, but it's pretty compelling. So this can be useful when you're making a case to VC or a board or your boss, depending on where you are in the organization, to make an investment in design. The way that design adds value is multifaceted, and I stole this from a woman named Leah Hickman, who used to work at Forrester. She's at Envision now, but this is kind of what she boils it down to, and we can point to reports that get into the specifics of each of these things. So, but basically, design makes employees more efficient and productive, which puts products in the market quicker, that are more innovative and drive higher customer lifetime value, improving the company's market share and position, and ultimately leading to growth. And so each of the things in bold, if you're interested, you can email me and I'll connect you with the reports or the places in the reports that get into the specifics of how design helps, for example, make employees more efficient and productive. So this is just kind of level setting that we all agree that design is a value. You probably wouldn't be watching this if you didn't think that was the case, but it can be helpful to have these specific reports to point others to when you're trying to build a case within your organization. And in terms of the opportunity, I just wanted to say that you should view and expect designers to be capable of making a specific, meaningful, and significant contribution to your company's success. We do see companies that bring in design just because they think they should, without really having a specific idea or even a vague expectation that they'll make a difference in terms of the success of the business. And that's hard then for a designer to actually have that kind of an impact, although certainly they can. It doesn't make it easier. And I can say that we've hired a lot of designers because even if they actually can point to specific value, they have a hard time getting that to resonate or in any kind of meaningful way with anybody. And they're just fighting to be valued, and they've fought and fought. I just recently interviewed someone who really had a great case to make for the work that she had done and the impact on the business, and still had to fight to be included in the next project. So it's a pretty common situation. So assuming we all agree that design is of value and you can get some funds set aside to invest in design, then there's the question of hiring designers. And we often hear a couple of questions. The first one that comes up is, how many designers should I hire? My answer, of course, is it depends. A ballpark ratio is 1 designer for every 8 engineers. In companies that we work with, because they tend to be more technical and the user experience design is more complex, this is closer to 1 to 5. But somewhere in this range is a ballpark for you. And then after that, the next question is, should we bring designers internal into our organization, or should we bring in design partners from out there in the wild? Whether that's an individual consultant, an agency, or a consultancy like DesignMap. So my answer to that is that actually both are good. And there's several advantages to doing both at once. So I'm going to talk through first hiring a designer into your organization and just a few tips about doing that, and then why it's helpful to have a design partner even while you're doing that. So in terms of, this unicorn always makes me laugh. In terms of internal hires, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times startups or people who are inexperienced hiring designers expect to find a unicorn. And of course they exist, but the idea that this person, and there are kind of flavors of unicorns, I guess, that can do all of the design things and is equally great at all of them, may suggest to a candidate either that you don't really understand or that they're going to be an army of one for a long time. So what we find, and again, there's certainly exceptions to this rule, but is that designers are generally either really great at design or they're really, really great at coding, but not both. It's not to say that designers can't have engineering skills. It's not to say that engineers can't have design skills, but usually we wouldn't ask for one person to be primarily responsible for both of those things. Also, pretty common is confusing a designer that would support a marketing team versus a designer that works on the product side. It's pretty rare to find someone who has the interest and great skill at both of those things. And then the other one is interaction design versus visual design. So interaction design meaning workflows, how things act from screen to screen, and maybe some information within the screen, but then visual design really getting into information hierarchy on the screen and colors and fonts and that kind of thing. Many product designers, and that's kind of the title that they would give themselves, can do both of these things. Few are really great and are super interested in both of these things. Again, certainly not impossible, just not very common. So we would look for one of those rather than both in a person. And then when you're interviewing, some things that I tell people that we're working with to help bring on design teams, it's okay to go ahead and take into account your personal opinion about how their work looks. And also, you really want to understand, not just look at the end product, but for at least one thing in their portfolio, ask them to walk you through the whole process. You don't want to just see like page after page after page of glossy things in their portfolio, but pick one and get into the sausage making, because that's going to help you understand how they think and how they approach this thing. And also it's going to help you understand anything in a designer's portfolio is the result of a collaboration. It was them and the product manager and the engineer. It was them and their professor. So you really want to get into how they think. I would always look for a designer to be interested in more than just design. So sometimes that is engineering and they want to know what technology is this built in? Why did you choose that one? Sometimes it's the business and they want to really understand the business model. Sometimes it's both or something else, but we would look for someone to be interested in how design plugs into the bigger picture at your organization, and someone who's not just like design is all that matters. And then finally, and this is a rule that I broke once in my hiring career to my great dismay, I would always, when looking at a designer's portfolio, critique something in it. And you don't have to be super harsh and say like, oh, that's gross, but you can say, I guess I would have done that differently, or I don't really understand this part, or why didn't you do it like this? And it's not really so much about your comment, but it's about how they receive your comment. And what I would look for is openness, curiosity, maybe a question back to you. Oh, that's interesting. Were you thinking this? Or they could say, we did try that, but we ran into this roadblock. But we're looking for, these are the kinds of conversations that you're going to be having constantly with this person. So you want to make sure that you enjoy having them, and that they're open, and that they're not defensive or disinterested in your opinion. So that's a key one that I always do in interviews, and I recommend. And so there's one of the one of the opportunities. So assuming that you agree that you want to hire somebody to be on your team, there's this question of like working with someone from the wild, again, an agency or a consultancy, while you're hiring. There's a couple of benefits to that. One is that you can get going now. So if you have a project that you've got rolling, you want to have a designer working on that project, usually you can get a design partner on board more quickly than you can recruit and interview and hire and onboard and all that stuff. Secondly, they can actually help with hiring. So they can point you to recruiters who might be good sources for designers for you. They can review portfolios. They can even interview alongside you. So that can be super helpful. And having a design partner on board, honestly, it's great bait, really, for lack of a better word, because a designer wants to know that they're not going to be the only designer that you ever hire, but you truly believe in the value of design and that you're invested in it. Just like an engineer would want to know, like, okay, we have a plan to grow this team. We believe that engineering is important to the company's success. And so you're literally invested because you brought a partner on board to help you with some of this stuff. And that can be really reassuring and helpful for them. And then my last point is, this is honestly my favorite way to work. When there's an internal designer working alongside the partner, even within their team, they become a great steward for the work going forward, because they understand what decisions were made and why. They were in the room when all of these things happened. And so you get better value out of the work that the design partner did going forward. And they may serve to level up that individual designer depending on how senior they are. So when talking with a design consultancy or agency, some kind of a partner, and considering whether you want to work with them, kind of like interviewing someone, excuse me, sorry, you want to see work in progress. So again, you don't want to just see like the shiny, pretty stuff at the end, but you want to see the sausage making. And so this can be really helpful, not just their like model or diagram of how they work, but like, let's actually get into it and see something and how it's actually going. I would always ask a design partner how we together will measure the success of this project. And hopefully they're asking you this as well, but you want to talk about that and talk about historically how they've measured success and how successful they've been against some of those things. Where are they going to stop? When would that end? What will they hand off? It's kind of obvious, but surprising how often those questions don't get asked. And finally, I would ask, what don't you do? Kind of like the expectation that individuals can be great at marketing and product design, there's often a conflation of marketing firms and product design firms. And I think that that's because marketing and advertising firms have been around for a long time. They obviously see an opportunity here, and they might carve out a little team to do these kinds of things, but they rarely have great chops that product design consultancies have, and vice versa. I wouldn't ask a product design consultancy to do marketing for me. I can't think of a firm that's really great at both of those things, although it's really common that for some reason that's the expectation. So either way, and I sort of referenced this earlier, we're looking to provide a cohort for your designers so that they have peers and mentors and they can learn. And I cannot tell you, we must have hired 20, 30 designers over the years at DesignMap who specifically left the organization they were in, even if they liked the company, because they were the only designer. And they don't want to be the only designer. They want people to work with and to learn from. Okay, so we agreed that design has value. We brought in some design help in some way, and now we're working together on design. So I have a couple of different sections here, and I wanted to start with learning or discovery or research. So I just want to tell a little story here. There's a great research study that was run, and in this study the researcher was standing outside of a store and had a drink in their hand and also had a clipboard and some books and would ask people to participate in the study. And when someone said yes, they'd say, oh, okay, I think I buried my paper in here. Would you mind holding my drink for me for a second? Person would hold the drink, they would fish out whatever they needed, take the drink back, and then show the research participant a photograph of a person, pretty neutral photograph. And the participant was supposed to state how they felt about the person in the photo. Did they think the person was a nice person, a mean person, whatever. So what they found was that even after holding a cup of liquid for 10 seconds, if the liquid was hot, they were more likely to state positive attributes about the person in the photograph. And if the liquid was cold, they were more likely to state negative attributes about the person in the photograph. So this tiny, seemingly insignificant little thing of holding a cup of liquid for a few seconds had a big impact on the research participants' responses. So I would caution you that while research is definitely not rocket science, it is a subtle thing to do good research moderation. And especially business leaders, product managers, founders, entrepreneurs, a lot of your job is to be charismatic and influential and to be a great evangelist for your ideas, to get investors on board and employees excited, and product managers in particular usually aren't the boss of anybody on their team, right? And that, if you take that personality that's made you successful at what you're doing today out into the field and you use it to talk to people, then what you're going to learn is how charismatic and persuasive you are, and not what you really needed to learn about your idea or the product. So we would expect designers to have some training in research, or for you to even have a researcher, but sometimes you're going to need to do your own research, and that's great. We love it when product managers and business leaders and CEOs and entrepreneurs get out there and do it. Hopefully your designer can help you do it effectively, or your researcher can help you do it effectively. But even if they're not there, we hope that you will learn to wear a different hat when you conduct research. Because at some point, it's worse to go out into the field and think you got good information and actually get bad information than if you just didn't go out into the field at all, right? So after research, there's really kind of the working together part, and I've called this work deeply. So there's this old book, I think it was written in 1999 by Jesse James Garrett, who was one of the founders of Adaptive Path, which was a really influential company in the olden days of digital product design. And he talks about the 5 elements of user experience design. And I use the book here because it's foundational. Many designers are familiar with it, but it also is a good illustration of this particular challenge. So Jesse obviously breaks things down into these layers, and I've redrawn them because I think they're ugly and also easier to deal with horizontally rather than vertically on slides. So he starts with surface, and that's really what you would expect. It's like how things look, and that's again colors and fonts. On the other hand, kind of at the starting point, there is strategy. What are we trying to accomplish here? What do we want to get out of the product? What do users want? And then there are 3 layers actually that Jesse describes in between. So scope, which is just where does it start? Where does it stop? What outcomes are we trying to support? What are we not worried about right now? Kind of structure, how are we going to put things together to support that idea? And skeleton, the outline, if you like, of the product, or you could think of this as the user flows and wireframes. So one common mistake that we see people make is just thinking that how things look is design, and that's it. It's fonts and colors. And I actually literally today was on an online digital conference, and a designer was asking a group of people, this was a developers conference, and he was asking the 80 people who attended what they think of when they think of design. And I would say 50% of them said colors, appearance, something pretty. So hopefully from this illustration, you can see that design can help in more places than just how it looks. Hopefully this isn't news to you, but it's still extremely common that people think of design as just that. Marty Kagan, I think, says if you only use them for fonts and colors, you're only getting about 10% of the value out of your designers. So the big opportunity with design is to manage risk, right? Technical risk, feasibility risk, viability and usability risk. But they can't help manage that risk if they're not involved, if they're just kind of like slapping colors on at the end. And that's the value. The value is helping them manage risk. So also, as I say, most of them go crazy if they're only involved at the end at kind of a superficial level. On the other hand, we have started to come across organizations that have heard about design thinking and this kind of like very broad, inclusive, iterative way of approaching the world, and they think that that's all that design is. But we invite our clients, and I invite you, to think of design as adding value across the spectrum from the very beginning to the very end. So once they've designed something, there's feedback to give. And it's interesting to me, we often for our clients will offer workshops alongside projects. And one of the workshops that they call out that they often choose is one around giving feedback. And I don't know if that's because it's in a group setting and they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel knowledgeable enough giving feedback. We wouldn't necessarily expect every product manager to be able to sit through a code review and contribute in a meaningful way, but we do in design. And so maybe this is why this workshop is so popular, but I wanted to include it here because people ask about it so often. So have you ever been in this situation? There's a designer and a business leader. You can tell the designer because of the hipster glasses, and the designer shows something, and the business leader is like, oh gosh, I love that blue, let's say. I love that color blue. And the designer is like, oh, no. This is just a wireframe. It's not, the colors were just to show action buttons or the happy path or something. And so if you start a meeting like that, then the business leader feels maybe dumb, right? Like not giving, I came to add value, I tried to add value, the value I tried to add was rejected, and the designer seems defensive. And we would always caution, we always ask designers to tee meetings up and to say, here's what I'd like to get out of this meeting. Here's what we did last time. It doesn't have to be long. You could do it in 5 seconds in a hallway if you're having a hallway conversation. But hey, last time we were talking about the call to action not being clear, and I tried 3 different versions of this, and I just love your feedback on whether you think the call to action is more clear. So what they want, and they can say, not really worried about typos or anything like that at this point, just really focused on this particular call to action. But if they don't do it, then you can ask. You can say, okay, what do you need from me in this meeting? And what don't you need from me in this meeting? Because it's a terrible way to start. And you can actually use the structure that I described to you in the last section. So whatever the artifact is, and at a strategic level, it's going to be pretty broad. It could be a model or a sketch or a diagram, but the kinds of feedback that you give about that are going to be the same regardless of what the artifact is, just because it happens to be in the, you know, in the very beginning of the conversations about the project or the product, when you're trying to figure out what the strategy is. And so asking questions like, are we tackling the right audience? Who is this for? How is it helping them? How is this going to be different than the other things? Those questions will be relevant no matter what kind of artifact you're looking at. And this actually works all the way through. So at the surface level, obviously you're going to be asking different questions in a feedback session, or looking for the answers to different questions. Does this support my brand? Is attention focused appropriately? Is it clear? So this is another one of these opportunities that we suggest people know or ask what kind of input would be most useful based on where you are in the process. To continue on the feedback train. So I don't know what the icon is for intent, but my recommendation to you, so I've drawn it as a clear arrow obscured by a cloud. But my recommendation to you is that in feedback sessions, you focus on intent. And what I mean by that is that the user has an intent in their mind, right? There's something that they're trying to accomplish. And then the designer has in their mind a sense of the user's intent. And similarly, the business has some kind of intent. And you as the business leader, product manager, CEO, you have the unique perspective to see all of that and to make sure that it's all understood, on the table, taken into account, and headed in the right direction to align all of those intents. And so when you're in a feedback session, ask about the user's intent. So how does the user do it today? How would this make it better? You can ask about the designer's intent. And designers are not always quiet, but it's not uncommon to have a designer who's an introvert and who feels like their job in the feedback session is just to take notes and be quiet. But again, they had some thought process that is of value, and it may be helpful to you to understand what that was. So what was the designer's intent? Which version do you like if you're looking at more than one version? Why did you do it this way? How did you get to this point? I think I made these animations go too long. And then you can also say that, talk about the intent of the business. I need to make sure that we're aligning to the business intent. Can we do anything to make it align more closely? Here's the intent. So this is I've been beating this drum for a while now. My advice to you with regards to feedback is to focus on intent. And then just this last point on design, I just want to suggest that designers design all the things. And it's one of the people I interviewed before the book was talking about designers and how great they were and how important they were to his company. It had actually 2 successful exits, and he attributed both of them to some degree to the quality of the user experience design and the design leadership in those organizations. And then he was talking about his current organization, and he said, well, you know, and of course the product managers do wireframes too. And I was like, why are product managers doing wireframes? And he said, well, the designer's on the next project. And as an example, we didn't know the screen was going to take a while to load. And so we were going to do something with the animation for the screen loading, and the designer was elsewhere. So that suggests some problems with resource allocation and process. And again, the design is happening in your organization. In the case of the example I just gave, product manager was doing design. A lot of times the engineers are doing design. So it's not like the alternative to good design is no design. It's just bad design. As long as you're paying product managers, pay them to do what product managers are great at. And as long as you're paying designers, you might as well have designers design all the things. So that's it for the talk part of the conversation that we had with Heavybit. I did have 3 ideas for you to try within your organization tomorrow. So one is you can use one of the indices that I mentioned at the very beginning and sit down with your design team or designer, if you have one designer, or UX engineer, if that's what you have, to score your maturity and set a goal for where you want your organization to be. I think I would refer you actually to the Envision Index is a great place to start, thinking about what you want your organization, where it is today, and what you want it to be. Another thing that you can do is ask your design team or your designer where they believe they have the most impact and where they wish they had more, and then try to help them do that. And a final idea is to attend a review meeting, but instead of stating feedback, try kind of the Socratic method of feedback and only asking questions and see what comes of that conversation. I would love if you could email me if you try this. I would love to hear how that goes. So that's it for me. I wish that we could have a conversation together instead of just you watching the recording, but I'm grateful for the chance to share this.